Hello, today we're going to be learning about organelles, and organelles are specialized structures inside cells, and our learning target is that we should be able to match organelles with their function and the life process that they fulfill. And if you remember, we just learned about the life processes in class today. And in order to, before we get to organelles, let's first look at sort of what they're named after, and that is organs. And organs, just like organelles, are structures that are specialized to perform no more than a few jobs. Like, for example, the function of our lungs is basically to bring oxygen, make oxygen available to the body, and also to excrete the carbon dioxide that is brought in from the blood. And a function of the large intestines would be to reabsorb water and also absorb water that we drink, and also to egest or get rid of the waste products of digestion. Why does this make sense? Well, think even larger than that. Think in terms of the economy. Why do we have to have specialized people to make things like shoes? Well, if we didn't have people specialized to make shoes, everybody would make shoes, and you wouldn't get the same kind of quality, nor would you have time for doing all of these things, doing everything for yourself. So we have, just like in economy, we have everybody specializes in a particular job. In the body, we have organs that specialize in a particular job. And similarly, in the cell, we have organelles, which are little organs. We have organelles, which also specialize in just to one or just a few specific jobs. And the picture that we see here is Euglena, and Euglena is a single-celled organism. And because it's a single-celled organism, that means it is able to perform all the life functions. And it has many all the organelles that we see here. A lot of them we will be seeing as we go through this. Now, here I'm starting off with the ending. These are the concluding questions, and you should have picked this up in class today. And if you didn't, it is available on Jupyter Grades. You just have to download it. And I expect you to be able to have this all filled out, and that's what you're going to be handing in into class tomorrow. And you should have 2 copies of this. One you're going to keep for your notes, and the other you're going to be handing in to me. What else do you need to know besides what's in that chart? Well, you also need to be able to identify these organelles in a diagram of a cell. And first organelle we're going to discuss is the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm, it's a jello-like substance that surrounds and supports the organelles. It contains a cytoskeleton that's made of protein, and these support the organelles, and they also are involved in transporting substances throughout the cell. So there you see one life function of the cytoplasm, and that's transport. And another life function is metabolism. And in prokaryotes, which we'll see exactly what those are towards the end of this podcast, in prokaryotes, most of the metabolism occurs in the cytoplasm. And in eukaryotes, which is what we are, and you'll see what that is at the end of the podcast, a lot of the metabolism goes on in other organelles, but there's still some metabolism, like anaerobic respiration, or the first step of aerobic respiration occurs in the cytoplasm. The next one is mitochondria, and mitochondria also does metabolism in the sense that it does aerobic respiration, and respiration is basically getting energy from nutrients. And what it does is it takes that energy from the sugar that are in the bonds that hold the atoms in the sugar together, making the sugar molecule, and it converts that energy into usable form, and that usable form is called ATP. And ATP we'll get into quite a bit more in the biochemistry unit, which is going to follow this one. And basically ATP is like the money of the cell. Just like when you want someone to do something for you, when you want to get something made for you, or just get something, you have to pay for it. And it's the same thing in the cell. When the cell wants to get something done, it pays for it in terms of ATP, and ATP is is a molecule that contains the energy that gets things done. One unusual thing about the mitochondria is that it contains DNA, and that's unusual because most of the organelles do not contain DNA. Most of the cell's DNA is contained in the nucleus. Next organelle has two names, cell membrane and plasma membrane. They're just synonyms. They mean exactly the same thing. And it is sort of like the skin of the cell. It is the outer part. It's the boundary between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell. So basically, it keeps what's supposed to be inside, inside, what's supposed to be outside, outside. So it's involved in nutrition in the sense that it will control it will decide if this is food and it will bring it into the cell. It's also involved in excretion in terms of getting the wastes out of the cell. So it regulates things. Once it can't regulate everything, we'll be seeing quite a bit more about this in another lesson. It's also involved in communication with other cells in terms of it will send messages out in the form of molecules that will go to other cells. And it provides protection to the cell in terms of that it will keep harmful things out of the cell. Then we come to the cell wall, and all the organelles that we've seen so far are found in both plant cells and animal cells. The cell wall is the first one that we're encountering that's found only in plant cells. Our animal cells, none of our cells contain cell walls. Cell walls are composed chiefly of cellulose, which is a carbohydrate, and when you look at your nutrition facts, you see fiber. The fiber is cellulose. We're unable to digest it because we don't have the enzymes that are able to break it down. There are bacteria that are able to do that, and some animals like termites and cows have a mutualistic relationship with bacteria that live inside of their digestive system, and those bacteria break down the cellulose, and they provide that, and they give some of that food to the termite or the cow. So those are able to eat things like wood or grass, which are mostly cellulose. Unusual thing about the cell wall is that it's an organelle that's found outside of the cell. It supports the cell, and it's the wood that allows tall trees. So when you have your piece of paper that you're writing your notes on, that's mostly cellulose, mostly cell wall. One main frequently I've seen a lot of confusion on exams between cell wall and the cell membrane. The cell membrane is basically what protects the cell in terms of keeping things out. That's what cell membrane does. The cell wall, even though you see the word wall on it, that's more of a structural thing, but chiefly the protection comes from the cell membrane, not the cell wall. Now the ribosome is a tiny organelle, and it's the cytoprotein synthesis. It's found both in the cytoplasm and on the endoplasmic reticulum. And we'll learn a lot about the ribosome in a few months when we get into genetics. Now the vacuole is it's basically a sac filled with things that's found in both plant cells and animal cells. I've divided them up between the plant cell and the animal cell because there are differences. Main thing is that in the plant cell, when you look at it, it's huge. Like if you look at the picture you see here of the central vacuole in the plant cell, it's very, very large, and it takes up most of the space in the cell. And in plants, it's used chiefly to store materials such as food. Also, it contains water, and water provides pressure that pushes the cell up against the cell wall, and this provides rigidity to the plant. You ever notice how if you've gone for a while without watering a houseplant, it starts to droop? And the reason why it's drooping is because there's not enough water inside this central vacuole to push the cell up against the cell wall, and that makes the plant start to droop. And when you water it, the water goes into the central vacuole, and and the plant springs back up very quickly. Now, in the animal cell, the vacuoles are much, much smaller, and they also contain many more functions. Like the plant cell, they do contain food. There also are other vacuoles called lysosomes that contain enzymes, and those vacuoles will then merge with the vacuole that contains the food, and the food will then be digested within that vacuole. A bit of trivia on here is that one of the first things that happen when someone dies is that these lysosomes, they break apart, and what the result of that is that the enzymes that are inside this lysosome start to digest the cells themselves, and that's the first component in a body decomposing. The vacuoles also contain waste, which are then excreted out of the cell, and also there can be substances that are secreted out of the cell, like hormones would be secreted out, and also nerve cells contain substances that are secreted out and then will go from one nerve cell to the other, and that allows the message to be sent down the nerve. Also, the cell that I've pictured here is a single-celled organism called a paramecium. It's found in fresh water, and you notice it has a particular kind of vacuole called a contractile vacuole. And this vacuole, what it does is it expels excess water. In fresh water, water is always entering the cell, and it has to expel that water to keep from bursting. Now, the nucleus is the brain of the cell. It regulates what goes on in the cell. It contains chromosomes, which are very large molecules that are made of DNA, and the nucleus controls the cell's metabolism. We will learn a lot more about what the nucleus does in the genetics unit. Now that we've hit the nucleus, I have to explain a couple terms that we did before. We divide all life into basically two groups depending on what's in the cell: eukaryotes and prokaryotes. And we are eukaryotes, and eukaryotes are all cells that contain a nucleus. That's the chief thing to remember about eukaryotes. They also contain a lot of the other organelles like mitochondria, and these include animals, plants, and fungi, and also protists. And protists include single-celled organisms like the euglena that we saw and the paramecium that we saw. And also the group also contains many multicellular organisms like multicellular algae, like say the seaweed that they wrap around sushi. Prokaryotes, on the other hand, do not contain a nucleus, and they have very few organelles. They basically have a cytoplasm and a cell membrane, and also sometimes a cell wall. And these are the bacteria. And also, since they don't have a nucleus, that means that the DNA is found in the cytoplasm. And as I said, that these organisms are bacteria. The next organelle is one that's found only in plants, and also in some plant-like protists like the euglena that we saw, which is actually has some functions like a plant and some functions like an animal. And with the chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis, and it contains pigments like chlorophyll that capture the energy in light. And it takes that energy, and then it takes water and carbon dioxide. Using that energy, combines those molecules, and it makes a new molecule, sugar, which is the food. And here are these concluding questions. So if you go back, you should be able to see all the information that you need in order to fill this out. And while I haven't told you what the life processes, you need to look back in your notes from class today and identify which it is. And I didn't give you explicitly what they are in the vodcast, but you should be able to figure this out from what I've said. And the jobs I basically said, and where you see in animals and in plants, you just have to check it. If it's found in animals, check it. If it's found in plants, check it. And I will see you tomorrow in class, where we are going to be applying what we've learned today.